Chapter Select is a series all about video game narrative. As such, there are spoilers throughout for the game Observation, as well as the movie and novel 2001: A Space Odyssey. Observation makes extensive use of flashing lights and strobing, so some of the footage contained in this video may be a trigger for those with photosensitive epilepsy, and discretion is advised. Radio static. Garbled messages. A single bit of text indicating that we're in orbit around Earth. This is how Observation begins. For around 40 seconds, this is all we get, outside of bleak darkness. The rest of the intro continues to slowly reveal details. A much clearer woman's voice through a radio asking for a response that never comes. An intensely slow fade-in showing a space station with free-floating debris, including an abandoned space helmet. Then, a spark, and boot information displays in front of you, and you become aware that you are an AI for a space station where things have gone horribly wrong. And your data is fried, meaning you have no answers. From this point on, it's a case of assessing what's going on. The woman, who we now know as Dr. Emma Fisher, directs you through parts of the diagnostic systems and helps get things back online. You find damage to parts of the station, you can't find members of the crew, and about 5 minutes into this, you receive a message of some kind, strange symbols, coordinates, and the plain instruction: bring her. 2 emergencies occur, a fire, which is easily dealt with, and a fault with hull contacts that requires you to jettison a module of the station, a module that sends a signal of crew members detected at the very last moment. And to assess further damage, you are routed to external cameras. And then, the prologue, 20 minutes in, finally reaches its climax, and you realise the true horror of what is happening. You are not in orbit around Earth. You are now above Saturn, roughly 1.2 billion kilometres away from where you're supposed to be, and you, the AI, did this. But why?
I don't know.
And so begins Observation, a BAFTA-winning sci-fi horror game by British developers No Code. And with this intro, I knew I was playing something special. The slow burn of this intro was impressive. For 20 minutes there is a permanent sense of dread, one that keeps getting reinforced with disasters, cryptic messaging, and a million questions. The story of Observation is a strange one, and one that doesn't offer a lot of clear answers to its mystery. But this is not a video designed to solve those mysteries. This is a video highlighting the many ways that Observation manages to keep the player on edge and tell a horror story with dread and mystery at its core. AI is common in sci-fi horror stories. The idea of an all-powerful, highly intelligent and hyperlogical entity being given control without the emotional core to consider the true consequences of its decisions is a scary one.
It was a morality core they installed after I flooded the enrichment center with a deadly neurotoxin to make me stop flooding the enrichment center with a deadly neurotoxin.
Not literally an emotional core, come on now. The most notable example of this, and seemingly one that Observation draws heavily from, is HAL from Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. HAL is a hyper-intelligent computer that becomes murderous. However, the reasons for this aren't from malice but from logical fallacies that come from conflicts between his core mission to relay all information accurately and a separate directive to hide information from the crew. The logical way to solve the paradox is to remove the crew from the equation, and so the events of the movie unfold. Observation has a similar situation with an AI named Sam, short for Systems Administration and Maintenance, who dispassionately carries out his duties as requested. However, unlike 2001, you control the AI. You are the AI, and the shift in perspective from the norm is jarring. The flat "I don't know" given in response to the stressed questions from Emma heighten this, as no doubt the player is as freaked out by this revelation as her. But you are Sam, and the only reaction he can give is a bland non-response. This is supposed to be you, but his reaction clashes with yours, and that creates a disconnect. It also means the emotional core of the story is kept separate from the player. Dr. Fisher, the astronaut you spend much of the game interacting with, is the story's emotional core, but you are explicitly not her. She is an NPC, acting on her own, and you are a distant, emotionless observer. She's the character we're supposed to empathise with, but we're always looking at her from afar, almost voyeuristically. We're introduced to her first as a disembodied voice, and then when we first see her, she's wearing a helmet for much of the first part of the game, obscuring her face from us and maintaining that emotional distance. A later portion of the game sees her asking for reassurance over everything that's happening, and to promise her that you've got her back. You can only give one response.
I am here, Emma.
Yeah. Yeah, you are, aren't you?
This is not really a helpful response, nor is it a particularly comforting one. You, the player, might sympathise with her, but all you can say is a stock pre-programmed answer that doesn't address the reality of what's happening. This is the only way we can ever interact with her. Flat phrases based on the limited options available to us. We never truly interact with her. We can even mess with her in a creepy, malfunctioning AI kind of way, usually by answering her questions in irrelevant ways. Sadly, the game doesn't provide a lot of opportunities to do this, but the few times it does, there's a menace to it, a feeling that when we do it, we're freaking Fisher out. It gives the same sinister energy as this.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
This disconnect prevents the player from feeling too comfortable or emotionally engaged in the horror. You're put in the position of a dispassionate observer who follows instructions, but the whole time, creepy stuff is happening, and you have to just go along with that. And it's uncomfortable. There's a meta-horror to all of this too. You, presumably a human, are playing an AI and interacting in limited ways with a human being played by an AI. While you might feel uncomfortable and disconnected from what's happening due to the limited responses you can give, the reality is that Emma will only ever respond in the way she's programmed to do. She's an animated computer model governed by the rules of the game's mechanics, voiced by an actress. She isn't really human, and you, the real human, are an AI. And remembering this fact at any point only enhances the feeling of everything being fundamentally wrong. Mystery is one of the core aspects of generating horror, and observation has this in spades. Because while we are a supposedly omnipresent AI with databanks of knowledge, there's just one problem. There's no data in those banks. Sam is damaged and we don't know why or how, largely because any data on what could have led to it is missing as a direct result of that damage. We know that we're at Saturn because of mysterious coordinates being delivered to Sam, but we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where the other crew are. We don't know when all this happened, and worst of all, we don't know how long we've been free floating in space. That last point also provides a new level of fridge horror, as in reality NASA probes to Saturn took 3 to 5 years to get there, and assuming we're working with similar tech, we now have questions of what happened to that huge chunk of time, and not only why Sam is unaware of it, but why Emma is also unaware of it. Much of the game involves you slowly downloading new data as you go. A lot of the data is junk or irrelevant, such as personal details about the crew, while some of the useful bits of data are corrupted. Even the laptops that provide a lot of the wiped data backups are glitching and hard to read. The extent of the data corruption is as concerning as the lack of data itself. Whatever caused this was sophisticated enough to wipe so much data so drastically. Not to mention, the full story just isn't there in what we find. While we can certainly piece bits together, it still never really connects with a consistent thread. We are forced to imagine what's in those gaps, and as we all know, nothing is scarier than what we imagine in the empty spaces. This lack of data doesn't just stop at the actual computer data either. The game restricts the player's perspective constantly throughout the game. Sam's vision is based on fixed cameras that could be moved around slowly in a limited capacity, and at key moments the camera is locked to specific points on the station. The limited and slow movements of these cameras mean that there are a lot of blind spots at any given time. Anything could be hiding in the corners we can't see after all. When our control of these cameras is wrenched away from us, it enhances this feeling. Nowhere is this more obvious than in your first visit to the central hub, where Emma carries you through the link module and reacts with horror to what she sees through the hatch, but we're forced to look at her, not what she's reacting to. Again, that moment where we have no idea what she's seeing is one where we're forced to fill in the gaps and let our imaginations run wild. There's also a lot of disorientation that makes it hard to piece together a mental map of the station. The cameras are in fixed positions and not always along the same walls or on the same orientation. These are cameras built for a zero-G environment, so one camera could be on what we interpret as the floor, while another can be on the ceiling, and another on the wall. Not really knowing which way is up or down is confusing and continues this feeling that we can never be comfortable. The disorientation on the station isn't too dissimilar to the same psychological effects experienced by real astronauts in space, who've described effects such as standing while feeling upside down, or a permanent sense of spinning, even while stationary.
When we first get to space, we feel sick. Your body's really confused. And so, you're dizzy, your lunch is floating around in your belly because you're floating, and what you see doesn't match what you feel, so you want to throw up.
The game does an excellent job at trying to recreate these feelings as under normal conditions, where you're sitting and playing the game on Earth, presumably in normal gravity, you won't be experiencing what Emma is. So by removing the emotional connection we'd normally have with characters and stories we interact with, and confusing the spatial awareness we'd have of virtual environments in games, the developers have disoriented us without the need to blast us into space directly. There are times when you get access to a sphere that can propel itself around, which helps alleviate some of the problems, but doesn't entirely solve them. You have to navigate with a narrow field of view, and while we can navigate the cameras fairly easily using a computer interface, that safety net is removed entirely here as we have to rely on our already confused spatial awareness to figure our way around. And nowhere does this safety net removal become more pronounced as the moment help arrives. About halfway through the game, a second space station appears in the distance, and Emma takes a spacewalk with Sam loaded into a sphere over to this second station. As soon as you arrive, the tension increases. Not only is it dark, but you as Sam are now significantly more helpless. You have no link to this station, so all those useful systems you had before, the cameras, the system links, the ability to open doors yourself, all gone. The darkness of the station limits your vision even more than usual, and having no knowledge of who or what lies in wait here makes an already dire situation worse. You can still scan though, and as you move through this seemingly deserted new station you find more laptops. This should be a relief, as we should be able to use this to figure out who our new neighbours are. But when we do, it's anything but a relief. Because they're us.
This is a laptop belonging to Dr. Emma Fisher.
It's not mine, Sam. Get it here. There's a message. This is Emma Fisher, on board observation. I don't know who's left, but we have to stick together if we're going to make it through. I don't know where Jim is now, and I'm going to try and lock myself in UC2 if Sam can open it up. Josh, there's another station outside. It's the same as ours. What the fuck is going on? Please, please come and get me. Josh, please, I love you. That's not me, Sam. That can't be.
Not long after this, we find a duplicate of the captain who initially seems as equally dead as the captain on our station before he wakes up. We find Emma's dead body while our Emma is still communicating with us. And finally we can interact with the other Sam, who reveals that the captain may know more than he's letting on, and reveals that the whole mission has secretly revolved around a message involving the human genome that came from the darkest reaches of space. And then we find another crew member, Josh, our Josh, who warns us not to trust the captain, who we're suddenly whisked off the station with. Josh is left behind while Emma suffers an accident in the spacewalk, causing her to seemingly die in space, while your sphere drifts helplessly away. And as you do, the horror and confusion of another identical space station gets worse, because now there are even more, popping into view in the distance as we float away. An unknowable amount of identical stations, all presumably manned by an identical crew. As we reach the climax, where we reclaim control of the ship, Emma returns in a somewhat changed state and we gain control of weird biological tentacles, the questions pile up further. We figure what's causing all of this to happen is coming from Saturn, and the only answer is to head through the raging hexagonal storm to the surface. That is where the answers lie. Except they don't. Emma's personality changes and she becomes more emotional and drained. She seems to know the answers but doesn't communicate them. We find a series of clones, all dead from the impact, seemingly all trying for the final push to find the giant hexagon. Oh yeah, the hexagon, the strange entity harassing us throughout the story, forcing Sam to repeat the shapes it throws at him. Small versions popping up throughout the game, with one announcing its presence via the interface with an ominous motion detected notice. At the end of the game we encounter a massive one that elevates Emma off the ground and merges her with Sam, teleports her to Earth, and then she infects the ground with her touch.
I've never felt that before, have I?
And then it ends. We get no relief from the tension, we get no answers. We're left with the awareness that we've encountered an unknowable cosmic entity that seemingly cannot be explained. We're left with a ton of questions, and our unease is unabated. Observation has truly thrown us for a loop, and has walked away. The 2001 comparisons I made earlier really come through here. In that movie and novel, a similar black shape appears to humans in space, and they become compelled to travel to a gas giant in the solar system to encounter a larger shape, in an ending that makes little sense, but leaves our protagonist changed in a way beyond our understanding. The 2001 novel explains the monoliths of that story as being an alien device that accelerates evolution, allowing apes to evolve into humans, and later providing humans with the knowledge of space travel, and finally, evolving them into an even higher being. Even though it's a separate story, Observation is clearly taking inspiration from this, and if we take this monolith explanation to heart, the hexagons arguably fulfill the same purpose. But while the 2001 monoliths seemingly wish to advance human consciousness to a higher plane in a somewhat peaceful manner, the Observation hexagons seem more malevolent. But just like watching the movie version of 2001: A Space Odyssey leaves you with a sense of confusion, Observation adds an extra layer of horror. What the hexagons have done to Emma and Sam is much more of a threat to humanity than anything the monoliths ever seem to be planning. Not only is our protagonist changed by the unknowable cosmic horrors, but humanity as a whole is now their target. The very concept of space is at the heart of Observation's horror. The empty vastness of space places us so far from home and unseating us, while the spacewalk sequence becomes horrifying as you imagine what would happen if Emma was unsuccessful and ended up drifting off into space forever. Something that does happen later, until she gets better. The hexagon and its powers also symbolise our lack of understanding what's out there in a vast universe. The hexagon was discovered because of a signal found in space detailing the human genome, and it brings to mind the radio signals we send out to see if we get an answer. What if we did get an answer, and it turned out to not be friendly? Or worse, something we simply cannot comprehend. But there's another angle to all of this. What if none of this is real? As well as disorientation, the weightlessness of space has caused astronauts to hallucinate before.
What you see doesn't match what you feel.
For example, the Salyut 5 space station being evacuated in 1976, when one crew member reported a toxic smell, something the replacement crew said wasn't there. What if Observation is all a hallucination? What if Emma is perceiving herself to be the AI as well as herself? What if the hexagon isn't real? What if the genome signal was imagined? What if Emma killed her entire crew over a failure of her vestibular system. And what would that say about the story that we just played through? Something about that version seems worse. The loss of personal control, the horrifying visions of creepy flashing hexagons and dual spaceships. The fact that the rest of the crew would be stuck up there with no means of escape. If anything, this version of the story would be creepier, and the open-ended nature of the ending does kind of allow this to be a possibility. Because that's observation for you. All questions with few answers, and the more you ponder them, the worse the answers may get. And that's why it's so effective at generating dread. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this look at the creepy space game that I loved. Make sure to click like if you enjoyed the video, and click subscribe if you're not already following what I do. I also have a Patreon if you wish to support my work. For now, I will see you soon, and please try not to think about how the weird hexagonal storm above Saturn in the game is actually real.